I'm Alex, and this is John, and this is Jill, and I'm replacing Mike for tonight. And tonight we're here to talk about the Ferris Doctrine.
Ooh, tell me more.
So do you guys know what the Ferris Doctrine is?
I do not.
I'm not sure.
So in 1950, the United States Supreme Court basically made a decision to bar members of the military from suing the government for their injuries. So now maybe you're not familiar with the name Ferris Doctrine, but are you familiar with this principle?
Yes. It's part of the contract when you enlist that they, at least my recruiter explained it explicitly to me that, hey, if anything happens, you cannot sue the military.
So how did that make you feel when you signed up?
I was 17. I cared about very little, and it was just whatever. Let's do this kind of.
The long-term.
Right. I didn't realize the implications or the effects that would have on my future, and
That you even had a future.
right. I really wish I would have paid more attention and understood it more.
So what do you mean by effects on your future? Can you tell me what?
So I was hit by a roadside bomb over in Iraq. I got out of the Marine Corps a couple of years later. I have a small disability, however.
No, you have a disability.
Well, my
Injuries.
thank you. My injuries, and let me.
It's never just one
sorry, guys.
simple. No, you're good. You
Go
don't
on.
apologize. You're never just dealing with one simple injury or let's say a minor cut or something like that. It's not something that is easily handled and then it's done and then that's it. With their type of kind of hurt that they have is never okay, well, it's a bump on the head, let me fix it, and it's over.
So you're talking about PTSD, correct?
Not just that.
Not just PTSD, but traumatic brain injury as well. Going back to it, I got out of the military and I didn't have a family, and now a couple of years later, I looked at the contract more thoroughly and understood more so. We could have had insurance for the kids covered through different things, like the SGI bill, or I'm sorry, SGLI.
And Agent Orange is the thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking of what you're saying, the Ferris Doctrine.
Correct.
And we didn't know that Agent Orange was something that was ever going to be applicable to us, let alone...
So why don't you tell us what Agent Orange is for the viewers who aren't familiar?
Well, and my knowledge and explanation is not expert or other than my own understanding, which is that it was from the chemicals that were sprayed and being used during Vietnam that were
To clear the foliage.
to help our war effort or whatever, however you want to put it,
Right.
and being exposed to the veterans that were, or the service members. They were never made aware of or even acknowledged that
Of
it
the
was
risks.
exactly that was neither here nor there. But afterwards, when it was acknowledged or known to the service members, they weren't even acknowledged as issues that were
Injuries.
there, issues that could be held
Compensated.
accountable.
So why don't you tell us about how you've dealt with some of the risks that you've had with your exposure in the field?
There's a lot of different factors that I probably still don't know about from the shots that we get before a deployment to the military weapons and vehicles themselves. Like Abrams tanks have 18 inches of depleted uranium armor, and that depleted uranium, or DU, is a huge factor in a lot of health problems these days. Even the military is kind of starting to admit it or talk about it, but it's really unknown. But the other factors are burn pits. We burned everything, especially in our we had an outpost. There were 30 of us that would be there 3 days. We had a 9-day week. 3 out of the 9 days, we'd be at this little outpost, and anything from garbage, from leftovers from our MREs, radio batteries. We had any of our brass that from a firefight or leftover munitions. We'd throw all that into the fire pit and stir in some diesel gas and
So you,
light it on fire.
you were cleaning up after yourself, and
Well, on top of it, there was we finally made our own
Bathrooms?
bathrooms, yes, and it was a 50-gallon barrel cut in half. So every day that had to be burned.
human excrement. And all
Human
that kind of stuff.
excrements, delicious.
So how have you dealt with this now that you're back home?
Well,
I haven't. My wife really.
it makes
Takes
me incredibly
point on
angry. It makes me incredibly angry because I now, having some sort of hindsight, and I'm conscious of the things that go on with legislation and all that kind of stuff for the Agent Orange trickle-down effects. But Gulf War syndrome was kind of the start of the acknowledgement of the things that he's talking about, like the burn pits, the DU, the unexplained illnesses, we'll call them, or the VA calls them, that these veterans were having. Well, the Gulf War illnesses and injuries initially were talking about guys who were
Pre 9/11, the
Right.
original Iraq invasion.
Exactly. They weren't being attached to the guys who went after. So Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, which is like John's era. They were left out of it. So to my understanding, they weren't going to be having issues because they handled all of the toxic exposure that was going to be possible to need to be addressed. So little did I realize they didn't. And now they have changed the scope of the Gulf War illness and injury time frame and the possible effects and people it affected. It's being edited as they go along, but addressed as best they can.
So has the government provided you with any kind of reparations or any kind of financial help as far as getting treatment?
The government has made it extremely difficult to get treatment, and they're barely acknowledging that some of these problems exist, let alone compensating us for it. So, no.
That
guess
may
it-
be-
And why do you feel that is?
They know that, like with Agent Orange, it's anybody that has this disease or this symptom, whatever the hell it is going to be rated 100%
And-
disabled from the VA. That is going to cost them probably billions of dollars. The VA seems to pride itself on not paying
Making it-
vets what they deserve.
They make it harder to get the compensation and benefits that you deserve because it's something that, with as many veterans there are and as long as we've been at war, especially currently, 20 years, it's
18 years in Afghanistan as of a couple days ago, and 18 years worth of individuals doing the same thing that I was speaking of with the burn pits.
that's just one
That's
specific
just one
right,
small area of the
veteran.
chemical and
Well, no, the veteran group as a whole. You have the wars that date back to the World War II guys that are in their own right having to deal with their things. But I'm sure that that's why the Ferris Doctrine that you were mentioning is something that they put in place, because down the road they figured that they might be responsible or try to be held accountable for things that they didn't think they should or maybe have to.
Well, let me explain the Ferris Doctrine a
Yeah.
little bit more. So the Ferris Doctrine is actually a United States Supreme Court decision. It's not from our legislature.
Okay.
It's it was a conglomeration of 3 cases where individuals were suing the United States government to get reparations for the damages they've experienced from what they went through, and the government, and obviously the government appealed all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and it was the United States Supreme Court who held that the government had sovereign immunity. It had, as a nation, it had immunity from being sued by its own constituents and by its own employees, essentially.
Okay.
And that's where it
Interesting.
came in. So, this isn't something that kind of went through the legislature. This is something that our United States Supreme Court has
Yeah.
decided.
That was-
So with that being said, are you guys currently aware of any efforts being taken in order to start challenging this doctrine?
There's the Burn Pits Accountability Act that the VFW itself has on its legislation page and is trying to help grow into a legal action or accountability, and its very definition that would be addressing this exact thing with the burn pits, the depleted uranium, all of those things, because it's not unknown that the government or the VA or the whomever you want to put it on is going to try and look out for their best interest.
Right.
That's going to be their number one goal. It's not going to be to make sure that these guys are taken care of. That's their own job, unfortunately, but it's why they look out for each other, and it's why there is groups like the VFW and all these special organizations that help hold the people in charge accountable for these kind of things. But what makes me mad, personally, is that I'm now seeing, years ago I found an article about the depleted uranium exposure and what the actual, it all meant. I put it in a file somewhere, put it off to the side, and came back to it every once in a while and read it and started understanding a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, I had seen something about it on the VA website. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this actually is something that needs to be addressed or is getting addressed by the VA. Like, great. And then I carried on. Well, then I went to check something that was on it and against the things that Jon was experiencing, and I all of a sudden realized that the information that was on the VA website that was being given to our veterans and their families and our American public as a whole is not the correct information. And they're doing that knowingly. And it's a deception that is not okay with.
When you say not the correct information, can you tell me what exactly?
They're taking the information of the depleted uranium that they specifically are talking about that are not dangerous and that are not, dangerous to a lot of veterans, and that they're taking generalizations that are about a depleted uranium size of atom and a actual chemical. It's so hard because I'm not a person who is a scientist at all or anything of the
just the best you can explain it.
So the military is saying that the particles that we would
Thank you,
inhale
Carter.
from the depleted uranium when the rounds are fired, the slap rounds, it's a depleting uranium saber round, and every time those rounds are fired, the individuals around will inhale that tiny amount of DU into their lungs, and that small buildup of
and then
radioactive material inside of you is not detectable by our.
They're saying it is.
They're trying to downplay the negative effects of the exposure.
It's not even just that though. They're saying that it's not going to be a negative effect, or that
Right.
it's not.
They're saying there's nothing.
They're saying they're looking
however,
at it and they're doing all of the research and they're doing all of their
Right.
work. So they're,
But the civilian research on it says differently, that it's a huge risk, and even a tiny amount will.
they're trying to downplay the negative effects of exposure.
Right.
And in all honesty, they're aware of the fact that it's not that it's depleted uranium exposure. It's not that it's the exposure of the veterans themselves and where they would be and how they would get exposed. It's the fact that the size of the particles they're exposed to in depleted uranium exposure it's battlefield depleted uranium. It's the weaponized depleted uranium specifically that is so small that it can get into your system and can be affecting your very.
Our test can't detect it yet, but it's still small enough of an amount to.
It's smaller than the generalized particles that the rest of the research has been giving information about that is the one that they're talking about. Essentially, it's the information that is correct, but it's not correct about.
So if you believe you've come in contact with this, what do you recommend doing?
That is a great question. There's the VA exposure. What is it?
Okay, so there's the toxic exposure.
The toxic exposure.
Okay, so the VA has a war-related illness and injury study
Environmental exposure programs and services for veterans at the VA. Thank you, Blue.
We're gonna pull up their
website right now.
the flyer for it.
They're the flyer.
This is the information on the environmental exposures program and services for veterans that the VA has put together and been forthcoming with. And
you can see that they're going over
a lot of what we were mentioning.
Agent Orange, the burn pits and open air hazards, depleted uranium, Gulf War sickness or
not even just the Gulf War.
Different ionizing radiation and toxic embedded fragments.
To answer your question, Alex, if you learn about filing a claim for the compensation, if your health has been affected, it tells you to veterans who have a service-connected disability and were diagnosed under the. Well, either way, you have to contact the VA and ask to be seen at the environmental exposure.
Yes, I actually just visited there at Hines VA hospital a few weeks ago.
And it was because of the information that the VA put out, and I saw this, the Special Environmental Health Registry Evaluation Programs. And it said that there was a way to be tested, which until recently wasn't out there. They had only the burn pit registry that you could sign up for that would say that you were...
If they found something in the future...
Right, but that was just trying to be...
contacted, pretty much.
It was trying to be proactive on the issues that are the ones that they're going to think there's going to be problems with, that you're going to need to be aware of and on top of later.
Okay, so now let's say you're overseas and you come in contact with this and you come home.
You don't even know.
Okay,
Yeah.
how would you even find out that you've had some
That's
exposure
the
to
thing.
this?
If it wasn't for my wife's research into it, I would have never even thought of it.
Essentially, it's, in my opinion, almost all of the vets who were over there during the time frame that they were over there in this chart and Gulf War era, they were exposed to, at the very least, burn pits. Because every base, even if you didn't leave the base, all of that had a burn pit on it, which means that they were exposed to the depleted uranium being burned, being not necessarily a lot of it, but it being
I wouldn't go that far, but
well,
when I spoke with the doctor at the
the Russian doctor.
Yeah, the Russian. She said that the majority of the depleted uranium exposure they're worried about is if you were in a burning vehicle or if you had friendly fire, somebody called in an airstrike and you were in the vicinity of that blast.
Right.
A lot of our munitions are depleted uranium.
But what about when you're also just around depleted uranium that is being fired and...
Right, I'm just telling you what the doc said.
Right, and I'm just telling you what I think about the general people who were exposed to it. Could be anybody that was serving over there. So
that's what our armor is.
So let me ask you this. I mean, given how harmful, obviously, these effects can be, do you know of any steps that are being taken in order to start changing our system and getting these veterans the care that they need?
No.
But
outside of the burn pit registry,
and now
this pamphlet,
which you have to know that you're trying to be looking for something that is to help.
So how do you think that the veterans can come together and try to effectuate change here?
Well, there was actually I think it was a Supreme Court decision that finally allowed a class action lawsuit against the VA, which is happening right now. And if there are enough vets that get together and say, hey, like, you guys are lying to us, here's the information that we know is being conducted properly by the civilian world and other countries as well.
If they can prove
if we can prove that, and you know these are going to be the effects or the outcomes, then you need to
Be addressing it, and
you
honestly,
need
so.
to figure out what the hell to do. So I think we need to get together and once again, like every other show we've done, information and getting the word out about it.
And trying to understand it and educate yourself on it, because I'm so embarrassed to talk about things that I'm not like fluently an expert on. And the stammering and the, stuttering is something that happens because I'm not a researcher, I'm not a researcher, I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody who has been avidly seeking the truth when it comes to this kind of stuff, because at the end of the day, recent research has provided abundant evidence that the uranium is genotoxic, capable of damaging your DNA, that's changing your DNA. It's chirotoxic, poisonous to your cells, mutagenic, capable of inducing mutations, not an X-band mutation, but kind of like that. Tetragenic, capable of interfering with normal embryonic development, and neurotoxic, capable of harming nerve tissue. That last one is everything that Jon has been dealing with when it comes to his headaches, his pain, his anything and everything since he got back from the war. Had that been addressed, had that been made clear that it was a part of all of his injuries and exposure, I could have been having his
We could have looked
nerve,
into more.
I could have been having his
research.
nerve tissue looked at. I could have been having the proper treatment. I could have been having him helped and his quality of life made better, because he deserves it. And instead, I was being led in 1,000 other different directions because they don't want to be responsible for the amount of people that were going to be exposed to this
Take a breath.
stuff. And
So do you have children?
yeah,
Yes, we have two children.
How has this affected them?
we don't know yet, and that's what
How
scares
old are
me
they?
too.
Scary.
8 years old is our
Daughter.
Guinevere, and JD is 2.
And I'm hoping and I'm assuming that for the most part we are blessed and they are okay and there's no issues with them later in life. However, I'm not gonna be.
I'm concerned. I've got friends whose children have clear signs of
A common thread between
I
them
don't-
that
I
is
don't wanna-
issues that, well, no, it's a common thread between them that is issues are similar, they're linked, they're all coming up the same way.
What do you mean by the same way?
The issues are all the same kind of symptoms, they're all the same kind of issues in the kids that it's funny.
What
They're
kind
all
of
having-
symptoms are we talking
They're all
about here?
having issues that are ones that deal with the way that their brains are wired and that they're being
they're aggressive. They've got
attention and
I don't know. I don't want to say mental health problems,
no,
but
it's more of a
neurological.
they have a different neurological makeup than they have neurodiversity that is common among almost all of them. In the same presenting ways, in the same ways that I have a I don't want to make assumptions, I don't make generalizations, and I don't want to put myself into a box and make too much of a
There are things we've seen with other combat injured vets that our children have in common.
now.
I'm not going to say exactly what they are, but
The Agent Orange.
We've got a minute left.
The Agent Orange exposure, long term, was affecting their children and the descendants of those affected by Agent Orange. And we're not denying that that's a possibility for Jon's and the Gulf War.
Well, since we're
as
running
well.
out of time, are there any final thoughts you want to give us?
Thank you for listening and making this something that could be talked about and addressed, even though it's not as clear and precise as it should be.
Thank you for having us, and if you're having similar problems or really any problems at all, reach out and contact us at K9s or any of your local VFW, American Legion, any of them should be able to help you.
Okay, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for hosting,
Alex.
Alex.
Yeah, my
Great
pleasure.
job.
Thank you.